sure. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Um, we are excited to have two wonderful presenters today to get our brains um, turning about how we can advocate and advance accessibility in our work as IMPs, whether or not that is officially what we do. So, if you haven't already, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and where you're from. And we are recording the session, just FYI. And Tamara's going to introduce IMP quickly before we jump into our program.
Thanks. So I'm Tamara Schwartz, and I am the co-chair of the Independent Museum Professionals Professional Development Committee. So we're the volunteer group that organizes and facilitates uh, learning programs like this for the IMP community. And IMP is a professional network of consultants and freelancers who work in all areas of museum practice and with all types of museums as well as adjacent cultural organizations. Our network provides a central hub of resources, knowledge, and peer-to-peer connections. We also work to support the museum field at large and to strengthen the relationships between independent museum professionals and the field. If you're interested in getting involved, we welcome volunteers. IMP is entirely volunteer run, and so we are always excited to welcome new volunteers and help folks connect to the part of the organization where they would like to contribute. So we'll provide a little more information at the end of the program about how to connect with us.
I'm
You're
muted. Okay.
muted.
Without further ado, I want to introduce Betsy Loring and Emily Robertson, who are going to lead us through our presentation today. So take it away, Betsy and Emily.
Emily, do you want to quickly say hi so people know your voice, and then I
Yeah.
will lead it off?
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Robertson. I'm based in Greater Boston. Really happy to be here with all of you. And I'll introduce a little bit more about myself when it's my chance to talk, but I'll pass the microphone to Betsy.
And I'm Betsy Loring. I'm a project manager and mostly an exhibit developer in Worcester, Massachusetts, and come from a background of prototyping, which is part of the work that I was doing here. So thanks.
Great. And so just a little bit of a background before we get started. So the title of this session is Accessibility is for Everyone. And that gets at sort of our dual intentions today, which is, first of all, to make the point that you do not have to be an accessibility expert to advance accessibility. So I hope that as you listen to Betsy and Emily's presentation today and take part in some group discussion, you'll start to see how this work doesn't have to feel intimidating or something that you need a specialty degree in to be a champion for. And then the other piece is that you don't have to have a disability to benefit from increased accessibility. So meaning if you are advocating or helping to increase accessibility at an institution that you're working with, you might have a target audience in mind who those adjustments are meant to help, but you'll likely find that everybody can benefit from small adjustments in accessibility, as that font change is meant to illustrate. Even if you don't identify as somebody with visual impairment, chances are this change in font made it much easier for you to read what's on the slide, and that's the kind of sort of hack that we're going to be talking about today. Small changes that anybody can suggest and put forward in their work.
I guess that cues me up. So the project that Emily and I are going to talk about is where we're pulling our lessons from. We were working with a place called the SEE Science Center, and I can't remember what the SE and E stand for, probably science and engineering. It's in Manchester, New Hampshire. They exist on two parts of two floors in a historic mill building that they rent for like $1. And they have 7 full-time staff, which is why you're not hearing from the woman in this photo on the left. That's Shana Horalchuk. She's the executive director, but she's 1/7 of the full-time staff. To make matters worse, in the building, the elevator to get between the two floors of the museum is not within the museum itself. People have to walk outside past the front desk to go use the elevator that's in the Greater Mill building. And until very recently, when somebody went by with a stroller or wheelchairs, staff would have to notice them. And then the staff would run downstairs to let people back into the lower floor of the building. So not ideal. On the positive side, they had developed partnerships with organizations that serve people with disabilities who are not being served by the school system during COVID. These are people who've aged out of the school system or have complex or multiple disabilities. And so SEE just reached out to all these organizations and let people have the run of the museum during COVID. So they had these natural partnerships. Between knowing some changes they wanted to make and having partners, they were able to secure money through the IMLS Inspire grant for small museums to fund this project. So next slide. And I apologize, I'm going to be like motoring through this. Hopefully there'll be questions. The guiding philosophy that really drove this project was that the barriers that the museum faced, meaning physical and staffing and financial, didn't need to be barriers to improving their inclusion and accessibility. Accessibility and inclusion work is a never-ending process. And the upside to that means it doesn't have a natural start place. You start where you start. You start with where it makes sense. And the other big part was recognizing that your partners are a resource. They understand their particular needs better than anyone else, better than an out-of-state accessibility consultant, anything like that. Who are your intended audience, and have them serve as your advisors. Next slide, please. So the project had two parts of it. One was physical changes, and they went after the low-hanging fruit that you can do when you get IMLS money. They replaced a heck of a lot of seating. They refurbished their lab classroom. And then for that lower door issue, they got a security system with a buzzer and a camera. So the staff can now let people in remotely. So they took care of those very quick changes that they could do. They've since gotten further money to do things like create a more accessible bathroom within the museum too, because people had to leave to use the accessible bathroom. Next slide, please. So the part that Emily and I got brought in was to change the culture of the museum staff to create a culture of anti-ableism. With that small a staff, it's not surprising that they have to rely on a lot of part-time staff who are high school and college students. They move on. If you don't build the culture in, you're just going to be constantly retraining. So that's where Emily and I came in. The physical pieces of this project was we did a survey and interview of all those partner organizations. Emily and I split those interviews. There is a disability inclusion and universal design training that Emily presented, and she's going to give you a micro version of it after me. And from that training, plus some other work, the staff then rewrote their training manual so that universal design and inclusion is baked in. When you're learning about the POS system, you're also learning about universal design and how to use customer service to bridge accessibility gaps. And then finally, on the same day that that training happened, we brought in user experts to assess how accessible different exhibits were in the museum. A user expert is somebody with a lived experience with disability. Either it's a person with a disability or a staff member or a family member who work with or live with somebody with a disability. In this case, we brought in one service organization, and the user experts partnered, so it would be 1 to 3 people with a disability and their aide. And then a couple of staff members would observe and interview to get accessibility and where the barriers were. Next slide. I wanted to focus more on outcomes than on the specifics. One outcome was when an educator was going around with one of the user experts, a woman with a disability and named Sue, and her aide. The staff member was horrified how many exhibits were physically inaccessible to Sue. And so she just ditched the evaluator mode and went into educator mode and started bringing the content to Sue. So holding hands with Sue and the aide, they created a circuit to an exhibit that Sue couldn't reach herself. They brought bubble solution to Sue because she couldn't get to the bubble solution. And in the postmortem, when we talked about it, we realized that just like we have social stories and kits for people with autism spectrum, we could create a kit or a book of exhibit hacks that family members could use to help people engage with the exhibit content. That is a process that is ongoing. So that will be, you'll probably hear about that at a conference soon. So that was one thing. Again, the barriers to the exhibits are not going to replace the exhibits tomorrow, but they can do something about it now. Second, the staff really did get empowered. I got the staff evaluations. They had a much broader understanding of disability and understanding of trauma, and comments made where people realized that this training would help them with people who had a different language, or recognizing that somebody was BIPOC might be walking in with trauma. And the staff truly understood that they could approach somebody, not make an assessment about what their needs were, and could find ways to help them. They feel empowered to make a decision on the spot, even if they're 17, to make things work better for that staff person. And then they write it up, and the staff discuss, is this a change we need to make to the training manual? Do we need other tools at the desk? So that staff empowerment has been really powerful, and the staff are the ones advocating for all the next steps on this project. And finally, those user experts got empowered too. One of the staff members from one of the organizations, I don't remember who, said that so often the clients are the receivers of services. It often comes with a little bit of pity or condescension, and it doesn't feel good to always be the recipient. And being asked to be a user expert, the clients were giving something back, and that ability to help a place that they loved was really empowering. And then there's a story about the mugs that I'm not going to tell until later if we have time. But just to spice it, to say, we got incredibly good feedback, both from the staff and the user experts. And this is an ongoing process that's just getting bigger. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Betsy. I hope that you will share the story about the mugs that were just on the screen. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody. And thank you, Betsy, for that great introduction on this project and sharing a little bit about what made it such a powerful experience for everybody involved. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you today. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your time with us and talking about one of my favorite topics in the world is accessibility, particularly in the museum space. I promised you I would introduce a little bit more about myself. So I'm Emily Robertson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in the greater Boston area in Massachusetts in the United States. And I wear a lot of different hats in my work. When I'm an independent museum professional, I'm often doing accessibility projects. I'm also a voiceover artist, and I've been a marketer and other things over the years. And I also serve as a co-chair of the IMP group for the New England Museum Association. So it's really fun to be here with the national group and saying hello to all of you from New England. a lot of people ask me, how did I get into accessibility work? And I like to think of it as something that's sort of woven throughout my whole career, no matter whether I'm working on a project that's specifically about accessibility and people are hiring me just for that knowledge, or whether it's actually for something totally unrelated, but accessibility and shows up everywhere. And I think that's really part of the theme of today's talk. I've gotten my experience in accessibility actually in 4 different ways. Some of it comes from on-the-job experience working in museum exhibitions for large and small museums and incorporating accessibility work there. I have my own lived experience with disability. I also today have a certification. I'm a certified in professional core competencies from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. I'm happy to talk more about that at the end of our talk. But the best one and the most important one, where have I gotten my career experience in accessibility? It's actually from the lived experience of other people with disabilities, being part of user expert sessions and actually getting information back from them about what can we do to make museum experiences better. And over more than 20 years, talking to people about their experiences has given me all sorts of information. And I love that aspect of accessibility, that it's this iterative process that we're never really done working on it. We're always striving to do more. Because just like the variation in human beings, there's tons of variations in accessibility. So to focus a little bit in today and to continue on with the story about the Sea Science Center project, I'm going to talk about what's on my screen right now. I'll read what's on the screen. It's a good universal design thing. So the slide here says improving accessibility through visitor service, and that's going to be the primary part of my talk. I'm first going to talk about staff training for accessibility improvements, and we'll do a mini training. And then the second thing I'm going to talk about is feedback from disabled visitors to make your projects better. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the user expert feedback sessions that that Betsy discussed when she was talking. So let's go to this slide. So this slide just has one sentence on it. Oh my gosh, here's the mini training. This is as small as it gets. Normally when I do a customer service training or a visitor service training, it might be an hour. In the case of Sea Science Center, it was about an hour and it had follow-up content that was in their staff training manual so they could continue to train people who weren't at that session. But one of the core things we learn is this wonderful question that we can use for any visitor. And I'll read it. It's on the slide right now. It says, how can I help you? It's incredibly simple. You're probably thinking, did I show up to this webinar today to hear Emily tell me that I'm going to use the sentence, how can I help you with interacting with people? And in fact, that is how simple and how powerful it is. I think with all of these topics, there's a lot of different words. We're using accessibility, we're using disability, we're using functional limitation, we're using, in the United States, we hear ADA a lot, or Americans with Disabilities Act. And on and on. There's so many different terms that can be really confusing and kind of scary, I think, for people when they're really new at it. But the key thing that I think I'd like you all to take away is that human beings have a wide variety of needs. And when museum visitors walk through the door, we have no idea what they need. We don't know if they have a disability. We don't know if they have one that's temporary or permanent. We don't even know if their need is something that they themselves considered a disability. They might not. I'll give you an example. So I wear reading glasses now. I'm going to take them off. They're all looking a little fuzzy right now as I take them off. I put them back on, I can see you a lot clearly. This is kind of new for me. And a lot of people would say, well, wearing reading glasses, that's not a disability. That's not a disability need. But through the various models that researchers use to understand disability, wearing reading glasses would actually count as a need. It's a medical need. It's a medical device that meets a physical need and therefore meets the definition of disability under the medical model of disability. Now, it's up to you whether if you wear reading glasses, if you think that your reading glasses give you a disability, it's 100% up to you. It's not up to me to decide or anyone else. And so that's an example where things can get kind of confusing. Another example would be if somebody has a broken leg, they would have a temporary medical need. They would meet that medical model of disability where we look through that lens and we see, well, somebody who has a medical need like a broken leg that disables them, they're going to need to use a crutch or another device to get around, but it's temporary. And so in that case, we might call their broken leg a temporary disability. Again, it's up to them to decide. And so I think when we're thinking about getting trained sort of from the ground up about disability, if we're really new to it, and I think a lot of the folks at Sea Science Center we're newer to this content, and that's actually a really good place to be because it means that we're not making assumptions about museum visitors, what we think we know about them. If we see somebody using a wheelchair, we have no idea what they need. We don't know what the nature is of their need here at the museum. So the phrase, how can I help you, as being kind of the starter question we would ask, can help us bridge those gaps where the physical facility kind of has some issues. The customer service or visitor service connection can bridge those gaps. And so the phrase, how can I help you, is a powerful one too, for a few reasons. One, it's open-ended. It's not a yes/no question. It empowers the visitor to speak for themselves, to have agency and independence in asking for help if they need it. And it opens up this dialogue between the visitor service staff member and the visitor about what they need. It can be just incredibly empowering. It can really help. And so that's where I think Sea Science Center really succeeded, is thinking about visitor services, and certainly with this question, how can I help you, as being a way to meet the needs of whoever was coming in the door. And it didn't matter whether their staff members were experts in accessibility or not. They didn't need to be experts. They just needed to be experts in asking this one question and being open and ready to receive the answer. Now, of course, they give them more training in specific scenarios, specific expertise around, for example, there are best practices in things like service animals, things like helping visitors to access restrooms. And there's all sorts of things that, of course, we would do specific training in. But this is a really nice kind of foundational place to start in that sort of mini training. This training also included other things. We talked more about those other models of disability. I mentioned one, the medical model. There are many others. We talked about invisible or unapparent disability versus visible disability, permanent versus temporary. We talked about laws and regulations such as ADA and other ones. And also we covered what is universal design in the museum setting. I'm not going to go too farther into some of that content. I know what's great about our field is that you're probably hearing about a lot of these terms in other places, but if you have questions, certainly put them in the chat and we can tackle them later on. Yeah, so I think those were some of the examples of that mini training. I'm going to move on to talk about user experts a little bit more. If I could have the next slide. Good. So just to recap, Betsy mentioned what a user expert is. So she told us that user experts are people who have lived experience with disability. Either they have it themselves or from a family member or a colleague, or if they are a care provider for someone in say a work setting, or a social service setting, those would all be examples of user experts with that lived experience. And in the case of evaluation, they are people that provide feedback. They're actually welcomed and invited to provide feedback on their experiences. They can be used in any setting in museums or elsewhere. And there's also sort of a subcategory of user expert, someone who has professional experience in accessibility training or advocacy, like myself, would be someone that I can talk about myself, and I can also talk about other people's experiences because I have that ability, that sort of training to understand what it's like for other types of people to experience museum settings. But usually user experts are able to speak, about their own lived experience. And I mentioned earlier on about my career that I've been so lucky to hear from many, many different kinds of user experts for the past 20 plus years, and it's always incredibly enlightening. I never have to worry about being the expert. I don't consider myself an accessibility expert. I consider myself a student of accessibility because we're never done learning about it. I may have my own lived experience, but I'm always enlightened by the lived experience of other people. But we can use this information to make our museums better. So you can do this in large and small ways. You don't have to have a formal evaluation program, although it's always wonderful to do so. If you're an IMP that's working in another space, let's say you're outside of exhibitions doing something else, you can use and gather feedback from people with disabilities in every aspect of your work. It can be as simple as calling up a friend that you know that has a disability and asking them what they think about something that you're working on. It can go from that all the way up to as big as a formal evaluation project like the one that Betsy and I ran for Sea Science Center, and kind of everything in between. And I think what can be really empowering about this is that you can get a lot of different information. And certainly, even if you've talked to one person, you've talked to only one person, that's true. And certainly in a formal evaluation, you would formalize that feedback gathering and be able to use that information that's really reliable. But even talking to even just one or two people about, hey, how things are going in general can be incredibly enlightening. Yeah. So those are some of the things to note about the power of using user experts. And I bet that you've already used user experts probably without knowing it in your work. Certainly, evaluation goes on in all different aspects of museums. I think the user expert model really focuses on people with disabilities and brings in their information and their feedback when it's often not with us. Gives us a chance to focus on them and really center their experiences. Because when we make things better for people with disabilities, those improvements are useful for a wide variety of people. And that has been proven over and over and over again. So I think that I'll stop there and pass the microphone back to Jenny.
All right. Thank you all so much. I've been meeting with Betsy and Emily in preparation for this session, and every time we talk, I just feel like I'm just writing down tons of notes and tons of things are coming to my mind. And I'm hoping that you all had the same experience listening to Betsy and Emily talk about their work with C. And so I would love, originally we thought we would do breakout rooms, but because we have kind of an intimate group today, I'm hoping that we can just kind of have like a discussion together in this space. And the benefit of that is that we will have it recorded. And I would love after the session to kind of pull out any useful takeaways that could benefit the IMP community overall and sort of document those. So if everyone's cool with having a group discussion, I'd love to start by asking, and you can answer by physically raising your hand or using the hand raise emoji on your Zoom thing or putting an answer in the chat. But how many of you currently, how many of you have work that touches the accessibility space in museums? How many of you are actively working towards improving accessibility in museums in one way or another? Okay, cool. Great. This is cool. So we have three people who have some of that experience. Oh, here come more thumbs up.
Some animated thumbs there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a variety, which is really fun. So I'd love to hear if you'd like to share what your work is around accessibility and or what came up for you as you were listening to Betsy and Emily's presentation around what might be some straightforward ways to incorporate increased accessibility in your work.
And I just put the questions in the chat as well.
Jenny, you might have to call on somebody whose hand was up.
Oh yeah, feel free to just unmute and chat. Sarah says working in a historic house museum where accessibility is a real issue. So Sarah, any sort of hacks that you've kind of picked up working in that space? I can see how that would be especially challenging because you can't really renovate.
Sarah, if you're, Sarah may not be in a place to speak on mic, but if you are, you're welcome to unmute yourself and say more with the group.
Sarah
And
did type some more information in the
yeah.
chat. I work in interpretation and exhibit specifically for historic house museums where accessibility is a real issue. We do a lot of iPad downstairs type things, but not ideal. I will have one thing to say and then I'll kick it to Emily. One of the things that C did really well, that they got a lot of compliments when we were interviewing, was their transparency. They make it really clear in multiple ways what they do and don't have. They didn't, until very recently, have an adult changing table. They they just are really transparent about that. And Emily can talk about specific experience in a historic building.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Betsy, for that note about that's a great way of saying what C did really well with their situation. And that we see that in other historic spaces, historic house museums for sure. I have a lot of career experience in that space. I actually love working on accessibility work in historic house museum spaces because it's such a challenge. Because there's something we can really sink our teeth into and actually make incredible gains by doing small things. And this is where I think you can probably use the C Science Center model of increasing customer service, that human touch can just really go far. And also telling people ahead, I totally agree with Betsy, let people know about the functional limitations of the facility. Um, it can really help people to feel more comfortable about coming out to visit. It can help them to make choices about whether they're able to visit on that particular day. And just really goes really far in helping to bridge those gaps. Yeah.
Didn't
Maya said in the chat that she's worked on a few different projects evaluating accessibility in museums. And not sure if Maya is still here. She may have just left.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Do you want to say anything about some of the projects
Yeah.
you've worked on?
Yeah, I've worked a few projects with the Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo, which is in Palo Alto. They have really done amazing work around accessibility. In there, they built a new facility, opened, I think, kind of during COVID 2021, maybe 2022. And really made a lot of effort to really ensure that the space was really accessible for a wide variety of different people. And they worked with Accessibility Advisory Committee, who was really valuable. And they really talked about like kind of when there's competing accessibility needs, and kind of like, oh, well, this exhibit makes noise and that's helpful for someone who doesn't, is blind or low vision, but can be really overwhelming for someone who, maybe is ASD or, something like that. So just kind of talking about like, how did they um, compromise, I guess, kind of work to best meet the needs that they could of the different audiences that they were working with. But they did some really great. They also added an adult changing table, such a huge like impact. The other thing that was really successful in their zoo, they added these little bronze sculptures, life-size bronze sculptures of all the animals. Very expensive, but very, very valuable and used completely by everyone who visited, not just people with disabilities. So that was really successful. In a different project, they really focused on the deaf, hard of hearing community. They added sign language translation to their videos. Also really popular with everyone. Like people really thought it was cool to see that as well. So that was something else that was really successful that they did. And then, I don't know. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to talk about it more. But yeah, great, amazing work that they did there.
Maya, I'd love to hear if, and not to put you on the spot, but if there's something you want to share about, like when you're evaluating these projects, what does that look like? Are you observing people interacting? Are you talking to folks? What is that?
Yeah, so with that particular project, two separate projects that I did with Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo, which were accessibility focused. It was a pretty big project, so we did a lot of different things. But they have a kind of once a month, they have a day that is early entry or late, sometimes it's late entry for families where someone has a disability. So we did some surveys with that audience, as well as surveys with just the general audience who is coming every day. Same survey with both so that we could look at like some or pretty similar with both so that we could compare those. And then they had really great partnerships with people in the disability community. So we also did focus groups. So for the focus groups, we invited people to come when it was convenient for them. So the families came, we kind of gave them like a week or a 2 week like period. They could choose what time they wanted to come when it worked for them. We made sure that did overlap with the special days that were reserved, so they could come to those if they wanted, or could come during any regular time as well. And then we met with them on Zoom after that for the feedback. And then that project also had a lot of staff training components. So we also did a staff survey. And then I also did interviews with the accessibility advisors. So it was a large scale project. Yeah. And then I just did another recent one with like Academy of Sciences where they had partnered with some people from different disability communities to co-create some exhibits. And with that one, we also wanted to kind of bring people in and talk to people who had disabilities. So with that one, we kind of worked in different ways with the different audiences. So again, with the blind, it was focused very specifically on blind and low vision. With those audiences, again, we kind of talked to people in the field about like what was the best way to kind of offer it. Should we do the same with as I did with Palo Alto, where we kind of gave them an opportunity to visit on their own. And so with the blind and low vision, that's the approach that we took, was that they were visited on their own and then came back in a virtual online focus group. And then the other group that they had worked with was people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. For that group, it was better and easier for them to do the experience on site with us there and then talk to us right after it. So kind of tried to approach it depending on the needs of the audience that we were talking to as well. Yeah.
Amazing.
We also did with Academy of Sciences, we also did just like interviews with general public visitors. And one of the survey questions that we had was, when they completed the interview, there was a little demographic survey, and we just asked if anyone in their group had a disability. We found 20% said yes. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well, just, in our general public visitors, that, really a good number of people were also coming with, with disabilities as well, that we might not have known. So that was interesting as well. Sorry, we're going to say.
I was just going to thank you for sharing that. It's great to just, for me as somebody who's sort of new to this work in an official capacity, and I'm not in an official capacity, but I'm gaining awareness and feeling more prepared to advocate for accessibility needs. And for me, one of the most important things to learn is how many people identify as living with a disability of some kind, and that's really important to think about. I work in education, and one thing that, so I rely a lot on universal design for learning. Is everybody familiar with universal design that Emily was mentioning? Great. So universal design for learning is a similar idea where we think about the learners in front of us not as being sort of average with a few outliers, but really comprising a super diverse spectrum of strengths and challenges and interests and all of it, right? And so when we design so that the majority of that diversity is kept in mind to some degree, we're not going to meet everybody's needs, but like we can do our best to really cast as wide of a net as possible. And I think that's a really useful approach. But I wanted to ask, what questions do you have for Betsy and Emily about advancing accessibility in the kind of work that you do?
One of the questions I have, and I think Betsy, you mentioned that you had done some prototyping. Some of the discussion today and some of the work I've done has been more taking an existing exhibit and then thinking about how can we improve it for accessibility. But I guess I'm really curious about, how you kind of build that more into the timelines when exhibits are originally created. And I'm thinking prototyping is probably key to that. And I'm also thinking about a lot of the projects that I'm on, those timelines don't allow for that kind of prototyping. So anyway, I just would love to hear more about how to advocate for more accessible design in the creation of the exhibit as opposed to the retrofitting.
Yeah, to be clear with C, this was all about retrofitting. Well, so, I do prototyping for a living. When people are reluctant to spend the time, they say they don't have the time or the money, call their BS on them a little bit, because it's like, if you don't have a month, I mean, I would prefer many, many months, because I want to test things during school vacation. Because I work in science and children, so that's when I can get a lot of visitors. But if you don't have 500 or $5,000 to prototype, do you really have 50 or $75,000 to do an exhibit you're going to have to tear out after 3 months because somebody broke their leg, or it doesn't work, or they think it's broken? It's simply, and I literally gave a workshop, and somebody finally said, I think we just don't want to hear that we're wrong. And so I do think, when I train about prototyping, I address it. You're going to put up ideas that the visitors are going to hate. I had, out of 80 exhibit potential interactive ideas that we had visitors vote on, my favorite came in number 80. It will never see the light of day. So it's just helping people recognize that they are not their visitors, no matter how much they think they know them. And anytime you have people talking in a meeting about what you think the visitors are going to do, call yourself on it and say, let's go ask the visitors, because they have information that you don't have. And to I think it was Maya, you said like 20% of the people identified as having a disability. Well, by US, every statistic I've ever seen, 20 to 25, it's like 25% of the US population has a disability on average. So if you're just testing with a good mix of your visitors, and then if you have specific questions about accessibility, finding people you can partner with us, when we didn't get a certain grade or something like that, we would go to the YMCA or the Boys and Girls and get that information. But visitors and user experts will answer questions you can't answer. It doesn't mean you're not the expert. So, yeah, I would just think of a more polite way to say bullshit. Pardon me, recording. Yeah, I just think you spend pennies and dollars to save 5 figures, 10 figure, 5 and 6 figure amount of money. It's just ridiculous to think that you're a brilliant expert on what's in somebody else's head.
Yeah,
So,
and I think for any of us who have been making exhibitions for a while, we've had that experience. Like,
it's so
you
humiliating.
you always save yourself headaches and money by testing things before you actually build the final version.
Exactly. It's also a really useful front-end evaluation, especially, and in prototyping, is a really good subject matter expert containment device. Because when you're working with, for instance, a fungal genomist, and you take fungi out on the museum floor and people think it's a rock, it helps reset, novice learner from Clark University Bio 101 student to 6 years old, still sounding out the letters.
Are there other questions that folks have? I have one if there aren't others from our group. I'm curious for Emily and Betsy if you saw Maya had mentioned, instances where there might be some trade-offs or compromises to address the needs of people with different types of disabilities. And I'm curious if that came up at all in the Sea Science Center project or other projects that you've worked on, and how you've navigated those choices.
Go for it, Emily.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Um, yeah, Betsy, help me out a little bit on kind of remembering with C, they had focused the focus group session that we ran on that one day was people who have complex medical needs, and a variety of disabilities. Um, and so it meant that we could get a lot of different kinds of information. In other projects I've worked on at other organizations, we have done focus group sessions as well as other kinds of prototyping sessions that were sort of targeted to particular sort of, for lack of a better word, categories. So, for example, running prototyping sessions with people who are blind or have low vision. And then another session that's for people with intellectual disabilities, and another session that's, and then looking at sort of across all of those and trying to figure out what change do we want to make to this particular exhibit that we've been prototyping so that it meets the needs of sort of all of these different groups of people, for lack of a better word. I don't mean to categorize people, but sort of logistically, that's sort of how the projects ended up getting run. And I think it takes an exhibit team that's prepared for understanding all of these different modes of receiving information. Um, but it can work really beautifully. And actually, that's, and then of course, also kind of juxtaposing that with more general prototyping sessions with members of the general public who may tell you nothing about their lived experience. You may have no idea, but you're just sort of receiving information about their general use of a particular exhibit as it's being prototyped.
I mean, I will.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you.
Go ahead.
One
No, go
one
ahead,
thing
go
that
ahead.
I've certainly done, especially when we have age issues, where like
Mm,
little kids have a very different need. So that was actually an
mm,
issue with chairs. If you have chairs, you want them to be something that somebody can move if they're in a wheelchair to get out of their way, but you need a stool for a little kid. Um, but I know personally that sometimes we've created two parallel experiences that have different accessibility points. In one case, we had a digital interactive, which was about, and this is about age more than anything, about GIS mapping, which, if you're not like 9, you can't get it. So we did a physical model and got into sort of the developmental process people go through for learning maps and creating a model. So I think wherever you can do a parallel experience that both people can use, but one is going to be more accessible, um, adding the brass animals or bronze animals, not in direct sunlight, so you don't burn the children. But, again, everybody benefits from that. For somebody who can't see the animal, they can smell it, they can hear it, and can touch it. And so it's just how often can you present something in multiple modalities? And then there's also just being really transparent. So having a social story and letting people know where sounds are going to be, things like that are going to be for sensory issues. Discovery Museum in Acton does a really lovely job with special hours, and they're often targeted to specific groups of people, though everyone is welcome. So I'm not sure if that totally answers it, but.
Well, as we get ready to wrap up, I want to know, Emily and Betsy, if you could send us away with one nugget of wisdom, inspiration, advice for how to just keep this work top of mind, um, or how to approach it if it's something that we get to work with directly, what might that be?
Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first, Emily?
I'm ready if you unless you want to go
Go
ahead.
for it. No, go for
Okay.
it.
I think my takeaway nugget is that the museum field has done a lot of work in accessibility. It has a lot more work to do, and everybody has a role to play. Everybody has a role to play in changing culture around inclusion, accessibility, anti-ableism. So if you think like, oh, it's not, I don't have to be part of it, you do, we need you. You don't have to know a lot, and you can learn along the way. And that's one nugget. The next little nugget I'll include is that I mentioned, when I was explaining a little bit about my career, it's that people with disabilities over the years have been really open with me about their experience. And every time that's happened, I've tried hard to listen to them and then take that information and try to make the next thing better, even if it's an anecdote. It doesn't have to be part of a formal evaluation. And over time, these little nuggets of anecdotes really add up. And so I've been really grateful to them for their openness. And I hope to pay that forward. So I feel like if you go through the world, go through life, and you get to talk to people who have different kinds of experience, take it in an objective way and try to
Nice.
turn that back around in your work in the field. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say that that transparency that C does really well is really important. Don't sort of go, yeah, we're accessible, we meet ADA. Get really specific about what the paths are made out of, and let people decide. Um, and I will say that customer service, when we were doing interviews, one of the things that C got really high marks on was really good customer service and respect. And Emily really helped the staff feel more empowered to approach people who they thought might have a disability. Um, and it, I think just feeling feeling more empowered to help people, I think was the one big thing that really the staff got out of it. The other was really recognizing how much trauma is involved in having a disability. Um, that's where other venues that people talked about got really bad marks, was on how badly the clients were being treated. People going up and saying to the staff, "Oh, bless your heart for taking care." I mean, it was just like real nasty condescension and stuff that's just casual ableism. And sort of the more that people can really recognize just how much of a load everybody is carrying, um, that you may not see. And I think it just that how can I help you just goes a super long way.
Thank you so much for that. So like I said, I, oops, I lost my slides. I don't know how to get back to that. Excuse me. Um, Tamara, do you want to start wrapping up and I'll try to get my slides
Sure,
back?
sure. So just a couple of closing bits of information. I put contact information for Betsy and Emily in the chat, and I'm sure that they would be happy to hear from you if you have follow-up questions or would like to talk with them more about their work. We also welcome you to contact us to find out more about IMP. And if you have um, if you have suggestions for webinars or programs that you'd like to see us offer in the future, we always love to hear those ideas. And we, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are an entirely volunteer-run organization. So we always are looking for new volunteers as well who would like to help out in some way. So I've put in the chat the contact information for IMP, our website, and where to find us on social media. And we also really appreciate feedback on our programs. I am also putting in a link to a short survey where you can tell us about how what you got out of today's program, and any suggestions you have for improving future programs. A couple of other bits of information. We will be taking a programming break during the next couple of months for the summer, but we will be back with new programs in the fall, including a session that we're working on for September about the process of developing project budgets. And that is something that I know from my own experience can be anxiety inducing. And so we're going to talk with a panel of folks who work in different areas of museum practice about how they approach project budgeting and learn about different ways of approaching that. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially thank you to Betsy and Emily for sharing your experience, and thank you to Jenny for putting together today's program. And I think that's it. Thank you all.
Good.
Thank
Thanks, everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.